recently you guys have had a lot of success, press, crazy numbers, huge metrics, all that fun stuff. But what about the very beginning? Can you kind of tell everybody kind of maybe the bunt or the strikeout that you guys took at the beginning?
Yeah, so I think it gets very easy to be caught up in the fact that things are going well and that we have big numbers and people look at us as a company that may not have had to struggle in the beginning, especially other early stage entrepreneurs. But I can tell you that everything that early stage entrepreneurs could face, we have faced, from nearly running out of capital multiple times. I know some of our investors in the room may not want to hear that, but it's the truth. Being kicked out of my basement when we had our company located there, having larger scale companies tell us that they were going to destroy us because they were doing the same thing that we were doing and they had the leverage. So I think all of that is what was needed for us as a drive to get to the point that we are today. So I think it's been just a tremendous learning curve. When we look at the makeup of the team today, the majority of everybody in WedPics, including this section over here, this is most everybody's first startup. None of us really knew what we were doing when we got into this space. Certainly nobody knew anything about the wedding space. But we were just driven and we had the determination to figure out how to make things happen. So whether it's how to build a constantly evolving product, how to raise capital, how to market the thing, all of that those were all challenges that we faced early on that we continue to face. It's just the scale at which we face them now is different than it was initially.
I think you told me, we got together last week and kind of prepped a little bit, but I think you told me that take the show on HBO, I think it's on HBO, right? Silicon Valley. Everything that's pretty much, if you've watched that, there's 2 seasons out. If you haven't watched it, it's pretty cool show. But I think you said like everything that's pretty much happened in a negative way on that show, it's pretty much happened to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the show is a great example of entrepreneurship. It's exaggerated, of course, but I feel like there are lessons and things that all of us can relate to in each episode. Prior to becoming a startup guy, I worked for IBM, and I used to, when I would hire people into our department, I used to make them watch Office Space because that's the world that they were about to step into. So I think it's a nice parallel there.
So was there like any aha moment when you guys decided to kind of scrap the Deja Me path of going down? Because it was like a concert app, right? Like if we were all at a concert, we would take photos and share them.
Yep. So yeah, the original premise was go to a concert, you have hundreds if not thousands of people around you, you guys are all taking your own candid content, and the solution that we came up with was a way for people to aggregate all of that and share it without necessarily needing to know one another. So all of us in this room could be at a place, we don't know each other, but we have one common portal to share that and experience it through everybody's unique perspectives. The problem is that we had created a solution for a problem that didn't really exist. So then we were backpedaling, trying to figure out how do we create a problem for this solution that we're now sitting with. We're a group of all guys in the company at the time and one Nicole, who happens to be sitting over here. And none of us knew anything about the wedding space. But we knew that was a use case. In thinking through all of the different use cases for this solution that we had created, concerts weren't really something that worked. We started thinking about corporate events, large scale, that you have thousands of people that may not know each other, but they're all taking their own content. We had some decent early success with companies like IBM on that front, but it wasn't something that was scalable. And so we had to really have a long, hard look in the mirror and determine as a company what we were going to do, because we were rapidly running out of capital. We had an idea on the market that every day we would refresh our user count and we would just see it declining more and more. And so we just had an epiphany one night and said, weddings are what we need to go into. And a quick little side story, one of the guys who's also here, David, started as an intern with us in 2012, and he drove here from Ohio on a Sunday night, right? And he was going to intern at this company that was in the music space and building out an app for people to share photos. And he walks into the house Monday morning, and no one told me that we had this intern that was coming here. And so he walks into my basement, and I was like, "Can I help you?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm here to intern with you guys for Deja Me." We're like, "Oh, actually, the company's now WedPics, and we're a wedding photo company. So just sit over here, and we'll get started."
And he's stayed on. He's still here.
He's still here.
All right.
He stuck with us, and it was kind of funny, but in the grand scheme of things, the idea, even though it's in a space that nobody knew anything about, I think the takeaway is that we were able to find the exact right fit in terms of market for this idea that we came up with, where we really had a problem solution that we could offer. In the case of a wedding, the problem was the disposable camera that you see on the tables. And then the solution was the offering of the original Deja Me app rebranded as a wedding photo app.
So I think something in the back of a lot of entrepreneurs' minds, like when they see the press about WedPics and how much you guys have grown, is kind of, when are you guys going to get acquired? So when you first kind of like started WedPics and you gained some traction, you had a company that approached you, well, maybe like even a couple weeks to that after you started, and they wanted to buy you. But you guys turned them down. Can you kind of talk about like what has happened since then?
Yeah. So we launched WedPics August of 2012. I don't remember the exact date, but it was at the end of August. And in October that year, myself, Edan, my co-founder, and I think it was just us or maybe one other person, we went to this wedding conference in Las Vegas, and we had a booth. We had a sign like this, and it wasn't a bridal show. However, I did attend many bridal shows myself, which is about the worst way you could spend a weekend on earth. But anyway, so we're at this wedding show. It's a big B2B event, and all of the big players in the space were there. So Edan and I were standing in our little 5 by 5 foot booth, and we're looking down the hall, and we're like, "Hey, the Knot's down there, and David's Bridal's over here, and Wedding Wire's over here. Maybe we can meet these people." And all of a sudden, the COO of the Knot walks over to us, and she says, "Hey, I actually used you guys at my friend's wedding 2 weekends ago. Love the app, amazing experience. Come to our party tonight. We'll talk some more about it." And gave us her number. And the two of us were looking at each other like, "Holy shit, this is huge." So we go to the party at the Knot, and we're talking, and all of a sudden we're surrounded by a bunch of C-level folks from this public company. And they're the biggest company in the wedding space. And when we were having our discussions early on about building WedPics and how to market it, we would sit around in my basement saying, "Man, can you imagine if the Knot would do like an ad for us on their homepage or something?" And now we're talking to the people that run the entire operation. So following that trip to Vegas, they invited us up to New York. We flew up there the next week. We're in their boardroom, and they were making us an offer to acquire our company. And at the time, thinking that we had just spent the last 18 months on our former app, Deja Me, and watched that app basically tank. And now we had the biggest player in the news space that we were in coming after us and giving us an acquisition offer. And it was a very low offer, and it was crappy, but it was cash. And it was secure jobs they were offering. They were offering to move the entire company to Austin, Texas, which wasn't too shabby. And for us, we had no idea what we were going to do in the wedding space. We had no idea if this thing was going to work. We had like 800 brides that had signed up and about 3,000 guests. And at the end of the day, we decided, you know what? This isn't really the right fit for us right now. Let's double down on what we're doing and let's see what we can do. And we politely declined their offer. They came back to us another time shortly thereafter with a slightly better offer. We declined it again. And then they told us that they were going to acquire our competitor and crush us because they had the reach and we had nothing. We had 800 brides. 1 year later, we had 130,000 brides and about 750,000 guests. So them making an acquisition, our partnership, really had no impact on us whatsoever. We were still able to scale rapidly. And I was sure to email their C-levels who had given us the offer every month with updates on how our traction was doing, and telling them that I'd be happy to continue chatting with them when they wanted to.
So I'll skip ahead because you touched on something that I did want to ask. So you do something every month that when we talked last month or last week, I thought was very interesting that I hadn't heard before. And you email, kind of investors, you email people that are interested, you email the not every month. What gave you the idea to start doing that?
Yeah, so being in this area, we don't really have the luxury of just going out to lunch and you run into 10 different startup people or investors or things like that. It's a smaller community. And so with that said, I needed to figure out a way to stay at the top of everybody's radar on a monthly basis. And so I started writing these monthly reports that I send out to potentially interested investors, other companies, be it strategics or just folks who I want to be on their radar. And I send those out every month, at the beginning of every month, and it gives them a quick overview of how we performed the previous month, and then a cumulative overview of how we've been performing to date. And I can tell you that is one of the best things that I've ever done. That has opened up partnerships for us with major companies. That has opened up funding for us. Our last round of investment, the lead investor, Bullpen Capital out of San Francisco, said no to me for almost a year. And following about 12 months of receiving those emails, they finally got to a tipping point where they said, okay, you guys have proven yourselves. Due diligence is done because they've seen exactly how we've performed over the last 12 months. So they flew in and then wrote us a check. And it's funny that the amount of entrepreneurs who I meet that don't know to do something like that. And it's the one thing that everybody who I meet with, I say, this is one of the easiest ways to ensure that you can stay on people's radars, you can stay relevant, and you keep them abreast of how you're performing, because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. People can certainly be impressed by your numbers, but if they see what that trajectory looked like and how fast you were able to go, like in our example, from 800 brides to 130,000 brides to now we're at almost 800,000 brides, and they can follow that momentum, there's a lot of doors that can be open, and I say that just purely from my own experience. So, to any entrepreneur that's sitting in the room, I would say if you take nothing else away from this talk, take that piece and think about who are people that you could build this Rolodex that you update every month on your performance, and just make it a quick read, something that somebody can open up. Don't expect responses, but just keep doing it, and you'll really be amazed at what will transpire at some point.
So you guys have done obviously pretty well with this whole WedPics venture. I mean, you've raised whatever, like $10 million. You're growing by leaps and bounds. You got a company of 20 plus now. Would it be safe to say that you can do something like this in the Triangle? Like, this is possible to do? I mean, you guys have obviously done it, but I mean, I think a lot of times people think, oh, it's Raleigh or it's Durham, it's the Triangle. Like, we're not going to get the investment that we would get somewhere else. And people I've heard of moving out of state to go somewhere else to try to raise money. You guys have done it here. I mean, would it be safe to say that it can be done?
Well, yeah, it obviously can be done. It's a matter of how hard you're willing to fight to make it happen. Nothing has come easy for us whatsoever. Even with the numbers that we have today, we're still fighting tooth and nail to get more capital on board, to get partnerships, et cetera. There are certain limitations to the area, but I think as a whole, it's just a matter of how driven you are as the entrepreneur, as the founder, co-founder, whatever it may be, and as a company. And knowing that you aren't going to have an easy time here, but I feel like it makes you a stronger company at the end of the day, because of the fact that you have to fight for, be it every dollar you get, every new hire you get, finding great talent, being able to execute against competitors who have advantages because of their networks, because of their funding, et cetera. There's been plenty of times when things have been scary for us because of the fact that we know that we have big competitors in the Bay Area or in New York or whatnot. But I feel like the fact that nothing was ever handed to us and nothing has been easy for us has turned us into a much stronger company.
So we kind of talked about the monthly email that you send out. I'm sure there's no typical day in the life of Justin Miller, but can you kind of describe what a general typical day looks like other than raising chickens and cooking
Yeah, so
tacos?
I usually wake up to my Boston Terrier jumping on me somewhere around 7 a.m. I sit in bed and look through a slew of emails, and before I even click the email button, I assess how many unread messages there are, and if this is going to be a bad push of a button or a good push of a button for what happened the night before. There's been the nights where we've had server meltdowns at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and things like that. So those are the not fun mornings to wake up to. But go through that, get up, usually walk over to where my chickens are, and I stare at them for maybe 15 minutes or so. A lot of people in the audience are probably sliding their
He
chairs
raised
back
his
a little
chicken. You
bit
took
more.
us like a Saturday or Sunday class at NC State, right, to how to like raise chickens or
Yes.
farm animals, and he went out and did it.
This is true. So yeah, I needed to find more hobbies. So now I can have chicken raising and farming as something on my resume. Yeah, it's a lot of the typical day for us is a lot of brainstorming ideas at work. We're constantly evolving the platform. We're actually working on a new app right now, which I think is one of your questions, so I won't go too far into that. But thinking about how to further scale the retention of our audience, how to scale out the monetization strategies, how to raise more capital, how to get on the radars of these bigger companies. So for me personally, it's a lot of emails during the day. It's a lot of phone calls, meetings. That's it. Probably some decent amount of yelling in the office, not necessarily at someone in particular, but yeah, that's about it.
Okay. So could you pinpoint, like, growth hacking's become kind of a popular term? I mean, I know you guys did the whole, like, we went out to wedding shows and bridal things and stuff like that. Do you have a particular source point for kind of pinpointing like the growth hacking side of it? Like, I mean, did Facebook ads do well for you guys? I mean, how did you guys grow to such big numbers that you have?
Yeah, so early on, like I said, just based on the makeup of our team, the demographic, we had no idea what the hell we were doing in weddings and had no idea how to acquire brides. So in trying to figure that out in the beginning.
Are any of you married, by the way? I mean, how many of you guys are actually married? Have any of you taken the plunge yet? No?
I think,
No, there's not a single one that's married on the team. Awesome.
yeah, so we had no idea what we were doing. So we went to the extent where I would schlep around this banner and booth and go stand at bridal shows on Saturdays, like around the country, and hand out pamphlets to brides and talk to them about signing up for WedPics. At the same time, guys, we're trying to figure out, do we run ads on wedding websites, wedding blogs? Does Facebook work? That was one of Edan's big breakthroughs early on, was on the Facebook front. He knew that market, and it was really ripe for us to be able to break into that, because the majority of wedding companies advertise on wedding websites, because it's a lot of people sitting around and saying, where do people spend their time once they get engaged? Oh, they spend all of their time on The Knot or on Wedding Wire or David's Bridal. And in reality, they spend a little time there, but they still spend the majority of their time on their own social channels, with Facebook being the dominant one. So we figured out ways to really break into Facebook through some pretty granular targeting, and we're able to leverage the virality that exists within that channel for our own good. Knowing that we had a product that itself was inherently viral, this was a perfect opportunity to steamroll that to a point where we could start to organically pick up speed on top of the paid acquisition. So it was just countless weeks and months of testing over and over and over, proving out these different patterns on a small basis, and taking that to investors and saying, this is what we can do if we add more fuel to the fire, give us some capital, and we can make this happen. So we had no idea what we were doing, but it was just a tremendous amount of testing early on. And we continue that now as we're opening up new channels like Pinterest, for example, or as we're looking at ways to broaden the way that we're marketing in Facebook. Originally we're targeting people based on relationship status, and now being able to expand out well beyond that to figure out what is the best way to acquire a customer on that specific channel.
I've always been curious, do you use Instagram to gain WedPics clients?
Not really, because advertising on Instagram doesn't make sense for a company like us because it's just too expensive. We use it as a channel for brand awareness, and I think that it's important to understand when you look at all of the different social channels, which are the channels that are going to yield user acquisition and which are the channels that are going to yield brand awareness, and knowing how to balance those correctly.
So, all right, 2 more questions, and then from me, and then I'll let a couple people out there ask some questions. So let's talk about the humble brag for a second. So we're friends on Facebook, and I see a lot of times you'll post like, oh, we did 10 million weddings this weekend, and we just raised $100 million, and we're blowing up, and all that stuff. Giving you a hard time, of course, but you do come out and you do post like big numbers, and you brag about the company. So, I mean, what do you say about kind of that aspect of, yes, it's your company and you want everybody to know about it, but then also if somebody's like sitting there like, really? Like, do I have to see another post about WedPics and how amazing it's doing? So what do you say about where's that fine line? Or is there a fine line with you?
I was always under the impression people liked reading that stuff.
We could take a vote.
No, I know that there's certain people that follow me on Twitter that have large pocketbooks, so I always like to stay at the forefront if I can on their mind with these stats. Also, when you think about just the fact that there's like 1 million or something apps that exist, or over 1 million apps that exist, how many of those apps are doing really well? And even how well we're doing with WedPics, like we're hosting 10,000 weddings a weekend, you would think everybody in the world that knows anything about weddings knows about WedPics. Well, unfortunately, it's not the case. But being able to project that on these different social channels, I feel like is just even more opportunity for us to get the word out about how well the company's doing. And ultimately, it's just a play to get on people's radars, get people to retweet, et cetera. My favorite tweets, though, are the ones where I take snapshots of how we perform in terms of engagement on Facebook against the Knot and Wedding Wire, and then I tag them, and I do that about once a week. And I haven't gotten a response yet, but those usually go over pretty well.
I'm sure you might get something in the mail, snail mail sometime about that one. So, all right, last question from me. You mentioned earlier you guys do have a new app that is rolling out, and you told me last week that it might be kind of risky to do this, and you're going out on a limb. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so at the point that we have reached now with WedPics, we're at a crossroads where we had to determine, do we focus all of our efforts on continuing user acquisition, or do we focus on the revenue piece? And so we decided that we're going to focus on both of them. The problem with the wedding market is that while it's an incredibly lucrative market and it's a giant money spend, you have a limited amount of time with each of your users. So the majority of people in this room that have startup companies are building a product that can that will sustain with the person as they move through life. With WedPics, we have about 9 months on average with each of our couples, and the couple is more important to us right now than the guest, although that's sort of being discussed, like what is the exact balance there. But because of the fact that we have a limited amount of time with each of these couples, we know that user acquisition has been what we consider the backbone of our company, because we haven't really gone after revenue too much to date. So at the crossroads that we're at now, and thinking about how do we take the company to the next level, we had to determine on the user acquisition front, what else do we do? Do we try to capitalize on the front end of the wedding and say that we know we have users for X number of months pre-wedding and we can do something with them there? We also know that our weddings always perform better on the back end, meaning after the wedding's done is when we see the majority of our engagement in each of our weddings in the app. Is that the piece that we go after? And so we decided with this new app that what we ultimately want to do is we want to continue that relationship with each of our brides to start with and move through the next big life experiences that they have, thinking that weddings are major milestone number one and then all of the subsequent events that happen thereafter. The reason that WedPics works for us is because we target the bride and then the bride pushes this out to everybody else. So now that we have this relationship set, we have the opportunity to continue that type of engagement where we continue to target that bride who maybe now is the new mom, the new wife, et cetera, and push through these other major life events. So we like to think about what we're doing with app number 2 in conjunction with WedPics is that we're honing in on what are considered life's most valuable events, the highest value photos. It's not a picture of somebody's lunch, no offense, Steels, but it's about this amazing family experience or this first baby, and those are the pieces that we want because everywhere else has all of the other content, but we want to be the repository for this high value content. So we're going down that path with this new app, targeting a launch of September, and then in tandem we're looking at additional ways that we can monetize WedPics as is. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, a lot of money flies around each wedding, but for us, we've only gotten our toe wet in printing. And so now we're looking at much larger scale opportunities on the monetization front, and our target is to roll that out hopefully by the end of Q3 to start actively testing what else we can do on that platform, and hopefully build something out that resonates with the user that then we can port over into the new app, assuming new app works. Now, in the event that new app doesn't work, which there's a very good chance it's not going to, we then ditch it, and then we put all of our focus on WedPics, and we go full force on the monetization play on the wedding side. So, this year is going to be a very interesting and challenging year for us. I think it's a great example also of the fact that we've gotten to this point. We've raised a lot of capital. We've grown as a company. We have amazing numbers, but we are back almost to square one again, like the summer of 2012, where we're building out a brand new app that we have no idea what it's going to do. We have to figure out how to properly market it. We also have to figure out what we can do with our current app to take that to the next level.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with the new app, and officially you are off the hot seat with me. But if 2 or 3 questions from out there, if anybody has, all right, I see a couple hands. I will go this way first.
While I really want the story behind Will's golden shoes over here, obviously you're a former IBM guy. You're probably not the prototypical IBM employee. Do you think that there are other startups, entrepreneurs within the IBM employee base that we might see become someone who produces more startups in the area?
Yeah, I think that as the area becomes more known for its startup abilities, be it abilities meaning companies that are successfully scaling here, companies that are gaining funding here, companies that are exiting here, I think as that begins to grow, you'll see more people coming out of the corporate comfort zone, if you will, and trying this out. I feel like the fact that this area is riddled with these giant corporations, there's a lot of safe opportunities when you get out of college to go work there. And I think that mentality will begin to shift, but we need to create more of a startup foundation prior to that really taking place. I think we're on the way there, though. Yeah, and actually one other thing to that point. When we talked earlier about the challenges of this area, I think one of the benefits to this area, when you think about hiring talent, is that we don't have a lot of competition. We, as like the whole startup community, don't have a lot of competition with one another in terms of who we're going after. A lot of our competition is the larger scale companies. And so it's like somebody could want to work at WedPics, or they could want to work at Red Hat or something like that. So in the Bay Area, you could work at WedPics, or you could work at Facebook, or the blah, 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 blah. So I think that is advantageous for us, but at the same time, it's going to pose its own challenges.
Hi. You mentioned earlier that the knot said that they were going to crush you. Why did that not happen?
I feel like it was the typical case of a big company not being able to get out of its own way and figure out what to do properly. And they were relying on a much lesser quality competitor of ours. And I'm not saying that just because they were a competitor, but they were like legitimately a bad app. And so it just wasn't something that ever stuck with their users. They didn't promote it as well as they could have, but it was like they partnered with them as a means to just offer this back out to their brides, but it wasn't like they were doing the testing at 2 a.m. on Facebook in terms of how to properly acquire a bride that would then become organic, for example.
Can you talk a little bit about East Coast versus West Coast money?
So that's a rap song, isn't it? At the end of the day, money's money to me.
I think that's another rap song.
It's we have raised more of our capital has actually been from North Carolina than anywhere else. But I think the biggest difference in being a B2C company is that type of business model resonates better with companies out west or in the Northeast traditionally than it does here. Very early on when I would go out to raise money and tell them about this idea, be it Deja Me idea or the WedPics idea, the first thing somebody would ask me was, how do you make money? And then the first thing I would say was, we don't care about making money, we care about acquiring users. And at that point, some of them would just want to end the meeting right there, like, okay, this just isn't for me. Whereas West Coast, you have a lot more people who are into that. And then they say, okay, if you're going to do that, then how do you acquire users for the least amount that are going to perform the best, that are going to result in organic acquisition? So it's just a different mentality. But I think as more companies like us and just the B2C companies that aren't first focused on revenue but focused on user acquisition and growth are growing here, I think that mentality will also begin to shift a bit more.
This might be a naive question for this room, but exactly how do you make money? Do people pay for the app? Is it by the picture, however many
The
pictures
only
they
thing
upload?
that we do right now is sell prints. So
Right.
we sell photos of the wedding to either the guests or the couple. And then to the couple specifically, we offer them these what we call app invite cards. So it's a way for us to market weddings, or WedPics through the bride back to her wedding guests. The interesting thing about that second piece is that was an idea that we came up with that didn't exist in the wedding. Like, we literally sell business cards for weddings, and we make six figures doing that. So I think the most interesting thing about that is two-part. Number one, that we were able to come up with a whole new means to monetize the market. And number two, that we were able to take a free app and get our brides to pay us for them to market the app back to their guests.
That's awesome. And since you love sharing your metrics, just real curious, what is your year-to-date gross revenue, if you're comfortable sharing that?
This year, we're probably doing about $50K a month.
Nice.
So, it's because it's not something we're focused on. I feel like it's a fair number to say. I think that for us, the purpose of implementing the two revenue models was simply to validate whether or not our users on the bridal side or on the guest side would be receptive to purchasing something with a free app. When we first launched WedPics, we actually had a paid model, so it was $99 for the couple to sign up and free for everybody to use. It worked for about 3 days, and then it just went down. And it didn't matter if we charged $99 or 99 cents. The fact that they had to pay for this thing, they looked for alternative solutions.
It's the mental thing, yeah.
So yeah, for us, it was a matter of just building in something that we saw not as a detraction to the overall experience, but as something that was a simple value add to the users and ultimately a test for us.
Awesome. Excellent story. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thanks.
Coming back, and you have a question, I will let you ask. You say you had a question?
Yeah.
All right, go for it. Last one.
How do you do different traditions, or how do you focus on weddings and different traditions? Are they all predominantly Christian weddings, or do you sell different packages for different faiths?
So we try to be as neutral as possible on the religious standpoint, on the gender standpoint, basically everything. We did not want to go down any particular path, just because you're never going to make everybody happy. And so for us, just trying to be as middle of the road as possible. Our best weddings are marketed to guy-girl weddings just because that's the largest market, but we still market across the board there. We don't touch on religion too much because we just, quite frankly, don't really know anything about that aspect of it.
All right. Thank you, Justin, so much for giving us your time this evening. I think, I'm trying to kind of make it so that we bring in guys that, not only have done it, but that are still doing it. And, I really appreciate like all the insight that you've given everybody this evening.
Want more secrets from inside the minds of entrepreneurs and innovators around the world? Subscribe to our YouTube channel here and click the link below. We'll send you our best interviews and strategies for growing your business.